There's nothing more exhilarating than being part of a political movement where people are trying to kill you. This is an era of total moral clarity. When they kill us, we will turn the other cheek because mercy overpowereth justice. My name is Kendall Bryan Hunter. I'm author of this book called Consider My Servant Job. This is about pain, suffering, the problem of evil, and if you're having struggles with the death of Charlie Kirk or the place of evil or the violence that's going on, take a look at this book. It may help you out. I talk about, it was written about 20 years ago, and so I talk about September 11th, none of the recent tragedies, but if you feel you need a book like this you think would be helpful, you're going to feel great once you get a copy and read it. So the link's below. So I went to the Charlie Kirk Memorial. I'm here in Provo, and so it's about 15 minutes away to go to Utah Valley University. I didn't graduate from Utah Valley University, but as a resident of Utah and as a member of the community, I 100% support that university. And it's very disconcerting to see members of your political party getting killed. You know, we see these old movies of the civil rights movement where Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X getting killed. So again, it's happening in our days, but it's happening to us. So if you feel the need for healing, go to the memorial. If you don't find answers, at least you'll certainly find peace there. So today I'm going to talk about something called the pink elephant effect, and it's interesting because once I explain it to you, your eyes are going to be open. You're just going to go, wow. I said, okay, everything makes sense now. Now they explain this pink elephant effect and also the operating model of the political left. And why does the left see things so differently from us? Why do when we dialogue, they get nowhere? That's what Charlie Kirk was doing, is dialoguing, prove me wrong. Asking people to discuss, and some of these conversations wouldn't go anywhere. They'd admit that they lost the argument, but they still would carry on their merry way without changing anything. So the expression "pink elephant" it comes from that cultural joke that when people get drunk, they see imaginary things, pink elephants. In the movie Dumbo, they have that song. I think it's the song "Pink Elephant Parade." Another way to express this is the one screen, two movies effect, something Scott Adams talks about. We really see things differently. And how do you dialogue with someone if one person is saying pink elephants, the other person isn't? Ronald Reagan once said, this was a Time for Choosing speech, October 27th, 1964. Well, the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they are ignorant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. So he's describing these pink elephants that they're saying. You're not ignorant, you just believe stuff that isn't true. Seeing things that are not there, seeing things that are not there, and not seeing things that are there. For example, compare the reactions of George Floyd versus the reaction to Charlie Kirk. 2 deaths, very different reactions. Now, think about the censorship of Colbert and Kimmel, but what about the Twitter files? Now, I'm a free speech advocate, but I also realize there are some business decisions. Stations were so you have the state action of the FCC, but you also have the private sector action where stations say, "Hey, we're going to preempt this." From what I understand, there's some behind the scenes stuff. Because you understand if he had apologized, said, "Okay, I was wrong with this. It was a high tense situation. I spoke incorrectly," we would have forgiven him. But apparently, he didn't want to apologize. What about the Parler app versus Blue Sky? I'm on Blue Sky. I was reading some of those very disturbing scenes. Now, by the way, Parler is back up. It's a new app. I tried to use my old login, but it wouldn't work. I don't want to spread myself too thin, but I'm an advocate of free speech, and with Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel, once he loses his job, he'll just have to change his business model like everyone else who loses their job. In fact, he'll probably be better off with it. Tucker Carlson got canceled. Roseanne Barr got canceled. They survived. Compare and contrast. Where's the pink elephants? January 6th. Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints issued a statement. This is a substance of Donald Trump's second impeachment. So compare January 6th to Occupy Wall Street and Occupy Seattle Capitol. Is there a double standard there? One person seeing pink elephants, someone else not seeing them? Here in Provo, so at Charlie Kirk's death, they held a candlelight vigil here in Provo. Then they had over at Utah Valley University, and if you're there, you understand it's going to be unsettling, and there's counseling available there. So Provo, you had the candlelight vigil, you had this memorial, but compare that to the George Floyd in Provo. There's this mob marching, and my sense is I think I was coming home from work, and I was going to my post office box, and I remember seeing this mob marching down University Avenue. I just got the sense I needed to get away from them really quickly. This was a danger. Later, right about where I was catching the UVX Rapid Transit, is where they had the shooting. So one's a candlelight vigil in Provo, the other one's where you have shooting. Now, keep that in mind, the shooting, the gun violence. Just because Republicans support the military and support the NRA doesn't mean that the left goes unarmed. Plenty of Democrat servicemen who still like shooting. It's a hobby. It's a sport. Some people like it and don't latch on guns equals Republicans because Democrats are using them. Compare Democratic states to Republican states, Michigan and California to Florida and Utah. What's the crime rate like in those cities? I was born in Oakland. They lost the A's, they lost the Raiders Nation, and In-N-Out Burger got shut down. That happened in Salt Lake City. But you're probably feeling right now that you can see all these pink elephants, and you're feeling confused that, okay, you have this nagging feeling that's been going on, but now when I point it out, you're feeling, yeah, you are talking about what I'm feeling. And why I'm talking about this, and this is going to be a bit of a long podcast, but it needs to be done in one chunk. September 2nd, 2022, or maybe it was the 1st. I may have got the date wrong, but this is the Independence Hall speech, the Darth Vader speech, if you remember, with the red lighting, and it was a dark, looked like a Sith Lord, the pale president with the black and red. And he said this: Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic. That's when President Biden, figuratively speaking, handed the suspect, and I won't use names here, the loaded rifle. You have the repetitive talk about Trump being a fascist. The president says that. That just created the climate for bloodshed. And I think a lot of the distress that's going on to the left comes from the brute fact that they're the ones drawing first and second blood, with the first blood with Donald Trump's assassination. The electoral process failed. 2 impeachment processes failed. So what's left? If he really is a fascist, if you honestly believe that, if that's the pink elephant you're seeing, what's left? And they just don't want to see it. It's the Pavlovian pattern of dialogue. Just keep repeating Trump is a fascist, and you get a Pavlovian response to it. Jimmy Kimmel lost his job, but Charlie Kirk, he lost his life. And one's focusing on the loss of job, one's focusing on the loss of life, and that's separate that. So here's the puzzle. How do you bridge that gap? I really think that part of the distress is people on the left just are not quite processing what's going on. And I'm going to talk about this, why they see pink elephants where we don't see them, with this model. And this model is 3 parts. It's feelings, fairness, and friends. Is when you're dialoguing with someone on the left, how they process things. Now, how I came up with it, part of it's just life experience. You just puzzle over stuff. When you talk with friends, like I said, I'm from California, so I have a lot of very diverse political views, heritage. Muslim, Shinto, Buddhist, Catholic, Protestant, Hindu. Everyone grew up with it, and we managed to make it work. It's just life experience talking with people, reading that. Speaking of reading, there's 3 key books that helped me come up with this model. One is Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. The second one is The Vision of the Anointed by Thomas Sowell. The third one is Slouching Towards Gomorrah by Robert Bork. If you've read those books, you'll see where I'm coming from. There's another 2 more points to it. One is this article in Smithsonian Magazine, and it had this MRI study where it was able to predict political beliefs with 83% accuracy. So I put a link to it, but you can do it just Smithsonian political MRI scan. They can do MRI scans, and there's a hardwiring aspect to this. A hardwiring. We may have 2 different brains, so operate differently, maybe genetic. The question is, okay, which one's actually processing reality better? If it's an 83% accuracy, that's very good. This is a hardwiring issue, and which one's processing reality better? The last one is Freud's paper on narcissism. And I think with that, if you read that, you'll understand where I'm coming from. And maybe as you read it, you'll say, yeah, it will resonate with you. So feelings, fairness, and friends. So text one on the left, this is the key thing. This is the epistemology component, the feelings, how they know things, why they believe things. It's an emotional thing. Remember, the question isn't what's true, but what's valid. They find the feelings valid. Conservatives find facts valid. It's interesting because the more intense the feeling, the more valid something becomes. That's why they have these scare tactics. And it's essentially an emotional attachment. For example, if you studied economics, you're familiar with what's called sunk cost, how you're emotionally attached to something. You just throw in good money after bad. The law of diminishing returns there. It's the same thing with the party affiliation. I've had friends of mine who are a bit aghast at the things they've been reading. People are just rejoicing at his death. So they're not switching parties, but they are raising a voice. Okay, you raise a voice, I can work with you. Another thing with emotional attachments is ex post explanations as opposed to ex ante reasoning. So ex ante and ex post, beforehand and afterhand. A reason versus an explanation. The explanation explains the feelings you felt. A reason says, okay, we're going to work through these principles. And that's the key thing is Republicans tend to work through principles. But for example, Glenn Beck's 9/12 Project, Rush Limbaugh's 35 Undeniable Truths of Life. We tend to think in those terms. And that's universal. The problem with feelings is they're just localized to a person. And that creates a problem. It's like, well, this is your feeling, but someone else feels differently. So how do you arbitrate between the two? Intensity of emotion, or you persuade, or what have you. This is tied in with Freud in his essay on narcissism. Now, I'm saying this, I'm talking about a generalization, so this is not a 100% thing. I'm not making a mathematical proposition. I'm making a psychological generalization. Now, my degree's in history with a minor in political science, so I'm not a psychologist. I am a human being, and I see things a certain way, and I think Freud is right on this. What Freud said is a narcissistic person has about 3 things going against them. Omniscience of thought, thaumaturgy of words, and magical thinking. So with omniscience of thought, it's you think you know everything, my way or the highway. And you see where that comes with feelings, that feelings are localized to you, so it's your feelings, so your feelings become omniscient. Now, thaumaturgy of words. So, for those of you who don't read fantasy, thaumaturgy is a technical, magical spell word for casting a spell that works a miracle. That you think by just your words, by announcing something or saying something, it suddenly becomes true. You notice that's tied in with omniscience. If everything you think is correct, just whatever you say will happen, just burst into existence. This is another expression that comes from Scott Adams called word thinking. It's interesting because that's Immanuel Kant and David Hume talk about analytic and synthetic statements. It's interesting where you're just kind of extrapolating from pre-existing words versus generating new information. That's how large language model works, is thaumaturgy of words, pattern recognition. People just think in terms of word. Jack London explained it this way in his book Martin Eden. He talked about people reasoning from words to theory instead of from facts to theory. Words to theory to facts to theory. I don't know if he read Freud, but he certainly got that right. Because when you talk with people, they said, well, this word means such and such, and backtrack. It's like, no, you have to talk about reality. You're quoting, who's your authority? Well, Thomas Aquinas pointed out that authority is the least credible reason for doing something. You're just relying upon a person's judgment, except in the case of like revelation, which is a different category. But, my say-so, Carl Sagan say-so, well, science is always updated. Then magical thinking, you think in magical, you can cast spells to change reality. And it's a little bit with overriding reality. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. One more comment about Sigmund Freud. This is tied in with the human nature question, because one of the differences between the left and right is how we view human nature. Is the left sees human nature good, and that's tied in with omniscience of thought, absolute feelings, and magical thinking, magical speaking. But Freud talked about the id, the dark side of human nature. What's human nature? Well, read Shakespeare, read the Bible. Do you believe that Shakespeare was wrong about human nature? But you have the id, the dark side, these animal impulses. He also talked about the death instinct, as opposed to life's instinct, the destruido and the libido. Libido isn't just sex drive, but it's the drive for creativity. So think about the destruido, the death instinct, and the cars that get smashed, the stores that get looted, the cities that get torched, and of course the people get shot and killed. And then the other thing that Freud talked about was called the pleasure principle. Going for your dopamine driver, what makes you feel good? Once again, feelings as an absolute. Freud contrasted that with the reality principle. And what the reality principle is delayed gratification. The apocryphal story about marshmallows. People who can control themselves are people who give into impulse. Short-term impulse emotions. Another aspect of feelings is that since feelings are localized to a person, you get individualism. That's the autonomy. I determine myself, and that's a good thing. But if you have magical thinking, you realize the problem with it. If you think you know everything, you're banging your head up against reality. It's like you're wearing your own set of virtual reality goggles and just going around. Individualism that's person specific, and you can be sympathetic and empathetic with a person's feeling, but it's just you. It's not a universal principle. You just know everything, and you can just talk things into existence. You just announce things, they suddenly become true. Well, I feel this is true. That's thaumaturgy of words. I suppose, okay, let's figure out what's true with our flawed brains. Christian, the Abrahamic religions talk about the fall of Adam. You have evolution. How you go from a pile of pond scum to thinking like Leonardo da Vinci. Why do you believe your brain is accurate? Kind of those fun questions they act. So some of the errors of that I've been talking about here and there as outlining this principle is the first thing when you talk about omniscience of thought, thaumaturgy of words, that should remind you of God. See, God's omniscience, and when he speaks something, it suddenly happens. Let there be light. And that's a bit part of the problem. We're fundamentally playing God, and that's why the narcissism kicks in. You think that your thoughts are all correct, and just by announcing stuff, it suddenly becomes true. Part of it is also the overriding reality aspect. People announcing beliefs, speech making. I am convinced that this is true. Try that in a court of law. Your Honor, my client's innocent. If you can't see that, the problem is with you. Something feels suspicious or a little fishy. Keep talking, but what's the universal fact that we can agree upon it, where I'm not just believing everything you tell me? You see this with Charlie Kirk's debate, the circular reasoning. Well, what's a woman? Well, a woman is a person who says they're a woman. Circular reasoning. It has to do with, you see this also with communication differences. And this, we're going to talk about a little bit Aristotle here. So this is, like I said, this is a very eclectic thing over a lot of years, putting this together. Communication differences, how you handle disagreements. You'll say something that smashes a version of reality. Hey, the left, by rioting, smashing cars, and shooting Charlie Kirk, the left is embracing violence. So the response is you'll just get this awkward silence. And that's a tell that they're losing an argument. They'll just stop their brains clicking. They believe certain things, that the right are violent people, January 6th. But then when you point out this, well, here's that, and people can't process it. I remember doing this one time with one of the people at my work, one of the managers. I remember watching his head just swivel back and forth. He wasn't trying; he's just trying to process something. So you get silence. Sometimes you get a one-word announcement. Fascism, propaganda. And that's not really communication. It's just once again thaumaturgy of words. And then you get the effect of many words. This is the word salad effect. That comes from psychology. I think Scott Adams popularized that too. That sort of how a schizophrenic person talks, where these words just don't make any sense. It's interesting. Aristotle, in his book Sophistical Refutations, he talked about there. It said he's talking about these refutations. There are 5 in number: refutations, fallacy, paradox, syllogism, and fifthly, to reduce an opponent in the discussion to babbling. Reduce an opponent to babbling, that is, constrain him to repeat himself a number of times. Once again, the Pavlovian approach. I keep repeating it, and you'll get a Pavlovian response, especially if it rhymes, like the Don't Say Gay bill, which had nothing about not saying gay, but just caught on it was an earworm, and just people had started having this Pavlovian response of repeating it. To constrain him to repeat himself a number of times, or to reduce him to syllogism, that is, to make an answer in consequence of the argument, to use an ungrammatical expression, or at least resort him to make him repeat himself. So, ungrammatical response. Bill Clinton, it depends upon what the meaning of the word is. The ungrammatical response only has one meaning. Repetition, Pavlovian conditioning, it creates an echo chamber. Everyone else is doing it. You get the groupthink. I'll talk about that a little bit later. If they get and that's how the left overcomes this overriding realities by Pavlovian groupthink. And of course, the right uses it too, but it comes just really more pronounced with the left. So, no word, one word, many words. They have the laughter, the ridicule aspect. You also have what I call the rancid rephrasing. So I'll make a statement, and then they'll say, oh, what you're really saying is just something horrible. And that's overriding reality. It's not what I said, and you're mistaking it. That's called a straw man argument. Another tactic is deny, deflect, change the subject. Stale, repetitive tax. People reposting dishonestly edited video. People making these incoherent statements. I had a friend of mine say that she was glad they had the Charlie Kirk Memorial, but she didn't want to make an attraction. Well, why? Another friend of mine is, she is concerned about Donald Trump with the first election, and if you're a woman, I understand your concern and disconcerting feeling you get when you see Donald Trump. But she said that she wanted to vote for Hillary Clinton because she was a known quantity. Well, what does that mean? It's kind of babbling. You don't like him, but you just can't have a good reason. You're caught in a double bind. And these statements, I really think a lot of this weird stuff that's going on is people either rejoicing in the bloodshed, or they're trying not to process. You just keep on posting these anti-Trump videos, and you're trying not to process the violence and the bloodshed is coming from your side. This was a 9/11 level moment. Think about the rhetoric about Trump's a fascist. You can see these compilations on YouTube where everyone just keeps saying Trump's a fascist, Trump's a Hitler. You have that guy said, I've never called them Nazis. And, half an hour later, you have 16 videos showing him saying this 16 times. Think about the rhetoric that led to Charlie Kirk's assassination. You had the Mueller report on Russian influence. That was a bomb. The Durham report. also about influence, but it talked about how the FBI was not a neutral agent. They were actively working against Donald Trump. They're no longer the untouchables. They could be tainted. Yeah, the Fine People hoax was debunked by Snopes. Trump ran. The electoral process didn't work. He ran for president. He lost the second time. From the information we have, I mean, there's no way to know for certain because it's such a complex system, but all the constitutional mechanisms said Trump lost the election the second time to Joe Biden. He won the election the third time. So the electoral process didn't stop him. Impeachment, there's two impeachments didn't work, so electoral process, two impeachments, and these reports didn't stop Trump. And remember, the impeachments were about Russian influence and also about the insurrection January 6th. So what do you know that Congress doesn't know? Because you believe it, once again, the omniscience of thought, but what do you know that Congress doesn't? Apparently you know something if you feel that he's guilty. Once again, you feel a certain way and it suddenly becomes true. Thaumaturgy of feelings. So if those things don't work, what's left? Well, the assassination attempt, the two attempts, then Charlie Kirk. Another thing is, why they're focusing on Trump, is that the violence is coming from their side. Smashed cars, burning cities, looting, and then the gunshots. But you remember, Joe Biden's brain was a gray, slurry mush. That's what the book Original Sin talks about. He was in cognitive decline, and they're lying about that to the detriment of the country. Who was really running the country? I don't know what he said. I don't think he knows what he said at the end. So you have that. Another tactic they use is ad hominem. That's a personal attack. Think about in terms of labeling. So your brain is omniscient, and you have thaumaturgy of words. So just by announcing stuff, it suddenly becomes true. Overriding reality. Just rewriting reality, overriding reality. They have the labeling as a form of that. That's Des Prager talks about this six herb: sexist, intolerant, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, racist, bigoted. Calling Trump Hitler, fascist, even though Nazis are socialist. That's the greatest disinformation victory ever. Another tactic they use is projection distraction. They accuse you of what they themselves are doing. Telling conservatives, okay, don't be violent, as they're smashing cars and burning cities and shooting at us. And they just, this meltdown is they're trying not to process. The violence is on their side. They're causing it. This was clearly someone from the left killing someone from the right. So here's the problem. Anyone who's done sales knows that you make decisions by emotion over reason, the impulsive short-term choices. That's Lee Iacocca said that's how he'd sell his cars, is that he knew that people made emotional decisions. So he always say, okay, what will your friends think when you see you in this car? Another problem with that is fragmentation. You have emotional attachments to incoherent ideas, compartmentalizing, a siloing of emotions, wanting contradictory things. It shouldn't make a difference if a man or a woman is in this position, so we need to have a woman. Those are incoherent statements. It's incoherent, chaotic, and destructive. Ravi Zacharias, who he did the same thing that Charlie Kirk did. He'd go to campuses and dialogue and debate and teach. It later came out that he was involved in a sexual scandal and a cover-up, and it destroyed his organization rather quickly. So when I quote them, I'm aware of that. I'm quoting him because what he says is true, and he references someone else's, so this doesn't come from him. Truth is independent of what Ravi Zacharias did, the disgrace he did. But he quotes Daniel Yankelovich, a social analyst, wrote a very insightful article in Psychology Today. Yankelovich's description of the titanic changes that are underway. He said in his article that the stakes in such changes are high. He conducted some case studies of the numerous couples we see to see where we are headed, and arrived at an astounding conclusion. Couples to see where we were headed and arrived at an astounding conclusion. That is, what he said about one of those couples we called Abby or Mark, quote, if you feel it is imperative to fill all your needs, and if these needs are contradictory or in conflict with those of others, or simply unfillable, then frustration inevitably invariably false. Remember, omniscient thinking as opposed to what's reality. And you have all these incoherent wants, these emotional drives are contradictory, and some things just can't be fulfilled. To add into Mark as well, self-fulfillment means, quote, having a career in marriage, in children, in sexual freedom, in autonomy, in being liberal, and having money, and choosing nonconformity, and insisting on social justice, and enjoying city life, and country living, and simplicity, and graciousness, and reading, and good friends, and on and on. The individual is just not truly fulfilled by becoming ever more autonomous. A need to move too far in this direction is to risk psychosis, the ultimate form of autonomy. The injunction that to find oneself, one must lose myself, contains the truth any seeker of self-fulfillment needs to grasp. And that's what's going on, is you just have all these incoherent wants. You know, you want to have a balanced budget, but you want to have all these government programs. Those two don't work. Subsuming everything to the Supreme Court's decisions. Now here's a related statement from G.K. Chesterton, the modern rebel, from his book Orthodoxy. But the new rebel is a skeptic and will not entirely trust anything. He has no loyalty, therefore he can never be really a revolutionist. And the fact that he doubts everything gets in the way of him in his way when he wants to denounce anything. The fact that he doubts everything really gets in the way when he wants to denounce anything. For all denunciation implies a moral doctrine of some kind, and the modern revolutionist doubts not only the institution he denounces, but the doctrine by which he denounces it. Thus, he writes one book complaining that imperial oppression insults the purity of woman, and he writes another book about the sex problem, which he insults it himself. He curses the Sultan because Christian girls lose their virginity, and then curses Mrs. Grundy because they have kept it. As a politician, he'll cry out that war is a waste of life, and then as a philosopher, that all life is a waste of time. A Russian pessimist will denounce a policeman for killing a peasant and then prove by the highest philosophical principles that the peasant ought to have killed himself. A man denounces marriage as a lie, then denounces aristocratic profligates for treating it as a lie. He calls a flag a bauble, then blames the oppressors of Poland or Ireland because they take away that bauble. Now pause there. Think about the double standard with the American flag and the pride flag. I do not recommend burning either of them. It's counterproductive, but think about the double standard there. The man of this school goes first to a political meeting where he complains that the savages are treated as if they were beasts. Then he takes his hat and umbrella and goes on to a scientific meeting where he proves that they practically are beasts. In short, the modern revolutionist, being an infinite skeptic, is always engaged in undermining his own minds. In his book on politics, he attacks men for trampling on morality. In his book on ethics, he attacks morality for trampling upon men. Therefore, the modern man is in revolt has become practically useless for all purposes of revolt. By rebelling against everything, he has lost his right to rebel against anything. So when you have feelings, everyone's omniscient, and they think that their feelings are an absolute and that they can just talk things into existence. How this works together, how you build communities through relativism. True for you, but not for me. This is our truth. Remember, the better term is not truth, it's validity. Are your feelings valid, or is truth valid? Let me pause here. My voice is wearing out a bit. So the next one is fairness. That's egalitarianism. That's distributive justice. Equality of results. Now, distributive justice is contrasted with procedural justice, equality of opportunity, but distributive justice, everyone gets a piece of the pie or a slice. He gets a piece of the pie or a ride on the slide. You see this with immigration. Everyone should be American. Americans' wealth should be evenly distributed among all people, versus how do you generate wealth? Student loan cancellation. Oh, by the way, if you call it student loan forgiveness, you've lost the persuasion war. Use the expression loan cancellation. The problem is that you want to treat people fairly, but you realize there are differences. Certain people are taller than others, certain people are shorter than others. Dinklage has been able to work around his heights. Same thing with Michael Rappaport. Very good actors. I started talking about people's height. That reminded me of the movie Space Jam. Is the premise for the basketball game is that the aliens were really short. So I said, hey, we're taller. And then we saw how that worked out. But we do notice degrees in nature. For Shakespeare again, Ulysses' speech in Troilus and Cressida talks about the degrees of nature and morality. There's a medieval argument from the argument of degrees. That's Thomas Aquinas' fourth way. Genesis 1 in the Bible talks about distinctions, heavens and earth, different types of life forms, male and female distinctions. Men and women are the same. Well, if they were the same, you wouldn't use the expression man or woman, because it would already be the same thing. It's a bit like in Revenge of the Sith. You're either for me or against me, which Darth Vader says. And remember, that's a quote from Jesus Christ, what he said. And then Ben Kenobi says, only the Sith deal in absolute. Well, if only the Sith dealt in absolutes, he wouldn't have said only. Bonus point, Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try. Is that an absolute? Thank you very much. So what happened is, egalitarianism, that's a good principle. You want to treat people fairly, justly, no prejudice. But you also have the fact that people are different. Think about the parable of the talents, where people were given different numbers of talents according to their capability. I started my mission in Portugal. So they have a different language, different culture, different history, different temperament. That's also talked about in Federalists too. One of the things that unified this country is that we had a lot of commonality, which raises the question that Yuval Harari and Judge Thomas Griffith have pointed out. Okay, the Constitution is a mechanism for arbitrating disagreements, but you have a pre-existing culture, as described in Federalist 2, where you don't have these severe disagreements, and we're shifting to an area where we don't have the concise culture or unified culture, so we're having these big disagreements. Egalitarian, too, is you treat people fairly, or all people are equal. That's why the left is so atheistic. God is not an instance of egalitarianism. Is that you have us, we treat all people fairly, but then you have God over us, and he has all the omnis, and so it's a smack against egalitarianism. If there's no God, then everyone's equal. But also, when you get religion, you tend to have a priestly class. You also have a sense of chosen people. Another thing is with personal autonomy, which I talked about, self-determination. You think about the commandments. Think about all the shrieking and screaming and arguments against the word of wisdom. Egalitarianism and sacred text. Are all books equal? Are all sacred text equal? You find that with how you live your life and by following the path that you've chosen. Once again, egalitarianism, the chosen people. Think about the anti-Semitism. Is the Bible right about Jews being God's chosen people? I'm not Jewish. My ancestry is English and Scandinavian. But when God says that the Jews are his people, what does that mean? And this leads into social egalitarianism with friends. So when I say this, I contrast this with conservatives believe in family, but I have to do a separate video. I'm using it in a technical sense about natural order. Friend is, with autonomy. Let me back up a bit. So when we talk about friends, what motivates them is community and inclusiveness, doctrine of inclusion. But also can turn into a found family, the family, a community at a workplace. Here's this expression, ward family. That's not a good expression. A family is a family and a ward is a ward. And you're attaching this emotional attachment to a family, or the ideal of a family, if you had a bad family, to a ward, and the language is shifting. Found family, that leads you to a focus on careers. That's your real family, workplace romances. Another danger of or an aspect to us, I shouldn't say, well, also danger in an aspect of friends is social validation. I have a friend or a family member who's gay, so it's good. I have a family member who's this or that, or there's a social movement towards this. So your ethical principles, whatever other people doing, you're doing. If everyone was jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. That's where you get the relativism kicks in, because if you have social validation, different people have different ideas, and what do you do? And that's where the viciousness comes in. Well, your ideas are different than mine, so I have to excommunicate you from my social circle, cancel you from social media, Twitter files. Remember those? truth is another person's feelings, so there's just no cohesion, and it's so destructive. Or truth is giving into social pressure, so you don't get truth, but you just have social cohesion, but no independent truth. And this is why the Democratic Party is so strong, is they're very good at building community and the social pressure and social cohesion and peer pressure. And if you're a relativist, that's how you hold together. So, well, everything's relative, so your view is as good as mine, unless you're that, but so it really isn't relativism. Of course, the danger is peer pressure and groupthink, going along to get along. So that's the model. My voice is not capacitated to talk for almost an hour. You can tell I'm slowly getting raspy. These guys that can go on Joe Rogan for 3 hours without going to the bathroom, I salute you. So the application. The good news is that this Charlie Kirk's death was a 9/11 level event. Certainly we didn't, you have the DEI statements and ESG. BYU had 26 items for the Office of Inclusion. I'm waiting to see what if they're going to be a similar level transformation at BYU with this death. The funny thing with BYU doing the 26 things is all you're saying is that you were really racist and no one was doing anything about it. So the good news, this is a 9/11 event. This is really transforming the country for such a young man. I don't know if you saw the clip where he met Rush Limbaugh, and Rush Limbaugh said, yeah, this is a guy who could be president. So people are rethinking things. You're seeing a lot of the ugliness on blue sky. People are going back to church like they did after 9/11. Really, the Democrats are expressing a lot of disgust. Now, we may have overcorrected with Jimmy Kimmel. If he'd apologized, I would have accepted it. Because it seemed like, you have the aspect of federal pressure, but there was social pressure, too, to it. He just had to apologize, and he didn't. So Democrats are expressing disgust at the gloating, and you're seeing it not so much a split in the party, but people's heads are trying to turn the right way. Some people are actually switching parties. We should welcome them good-heartedly and figure out, okay, what's our strategy for long-term retention so there's no reversion. Because we have the energy, the idea, and we have the moral high ground right now in this era of total moral clarity. I recommend this. Learn to speak Spanish. Háblase español para comunicar con sus amigos y las personas latinas. Y ellos pueden ayudarnos a vencer las elecciones. Learn to speak Spanish. Get a degree in political science and or law if that's your inclination. So I said they have a lot of cohesions at the expense of reason. Unity at the expense of sanity. When you base things on emotion, it gets very chaotic. You want to feel good about something, so you do these short-term decisions. You end up poisoning these cities with welfare funds. Alfred North Whitehead said this: mankind can flourish in the lower stages of life with merely barbaric flashes of thought. But when civilization culminates, the absence of a coordinating philosophy of life spread throughout the community spells decadence, boredom, and the slackening of effort. And in our case, we're seeing it leads to violence. Philosophy is an attempt to clarify those fundamental beliefs which finally determine the emphasis of attention that lies at the base of character. That's Alfred North Whitehead and the Adventures of Ideas. So I explained this model. How are you feeling? Does the world suddenly make sense? You understand when you talk to your friends, always think in terms, okay, is this a feeling? Are they arguing towards fairness, personal autonomy, and egalitarianism? Are they trying to build community at the expense of sanity? Or are they in denial about where the violence is coming from? Above all, to love them. Remember, mercy overpowers justice. Mercy overpowers justice. Mercy overpowers justice. That's the passing scene, seen with the eyes of faith.